Hello, friends. Tonight, we'll listen to a calm and peaceful story that will help you drift into a deep, restful sleep. Before we begin, make your bed cozy, dim the lights, and allow your body to fully relax. Close your eyes. Take slow, deep breaths. Inhale gently. Exhale slowly. Let's begin the story. There are nights when the wind moves softly, when every falling leaf feels like a memory. And on one such night, a lone traveler walked down an ancient path. In his backpack, a few books, a camera, and a heart that longed to awaken the voices of forgotten history. His name was Arif's son, a historian by profession. But more than that, he was a listener, a man who believed that even walls could speak if one knew how to listen. Tonight, he was walking toward Raghavgarh Fort, a fortress that had vanished from maps, but still breathed in the whispers of local legends. They said there was a guard there, one who had never slept. When Arif got off the bus, the air was cool and moist. Somewhere in the distance, the faint smell of burning wood floated through the night, and clouds drifted like secrets trying to hide themselves. An old villager looked at him and said softly, "Don't go to that fort, son. Someone stays awake there, even now." Arif smiled. "That's exactly who I've come to meet." The old man shook his head slowly. "Those who go there never speak the same again. Some stories are meant only for the wind." Arif replied, "Sometimes truth hides inside the wind too." The fort stood high on the hill, a shadow of what it once was. The path was rough with stones and wild grass, each step echoing like it belonged to another century. As he climbed higher, the air grew colder, the silence heavier. The first gate of the fort was broken. A rusted iron chain hung loosely from it, swaying gently in the wind. Beyond it stood walls that had been touched by centuries of rain, fire, and memory. Arif lifted his camera and took a picture. Then he whispered softly, "How many stories do you still remember?" And in that moment, a faint whisper brushed his ear, so soft it could have been the wind. "Stop!" He froze, turned around. No one was there. The air was still, too still. Only his heartbeat filled the silence. Inside the fort, the ground was cracked, the walls covered in dust and shadows. Yet something alive lingered there, like the echo of a soul that had forgotten to fade. He walked deeper in, his flashlight trembling in his hand. A long corridor stretched ahead, colder than the rest. It felt different, heavier, older, almost breathing. He turned the light toward the wall, and there it was, an inscription carved deep into the stone. Ancient words, faint but still visible. "I shall remain awake, as long as this fort draws breath." And below it, a name, Veer Ubaram. Arif's chest tightened. That name, he had read it once, in an old forgotten chronicle. The Sleepless Guard of Raghavgarh. Night deepened. Arif pitched his small tent in the courtyard of the fort. The moon rose high, casting a pale silver light across the broken stones. The air felt alive, as if the place itself was awake, watching him. He opened his notebook and wrote, "Tonight, I heard the fort breathe. If this isn't imagination, then perhaps stories really do live forever." His flashlight moved across the wall, and suddenly a shadow moved. Someone was there, tall, still, silent. The moonlight didn't touch his face, but his eyes glowed faintly, like embers that refused to die. Arif's voice trembled. Who's there?" The air froze. Then a deep, calm voice echoed, not loud but alive. "I am the one who was never allowed to sleep." Arif's breath caught. His body trembled, not with fear but awe. Before him stood the guard of Raghavgarh. His eyes carried no anger, only the quiet exhaustion of eternity. He was time itself, bound by a vow, anchored between duty and rest. Arif whispered, "You're still awake?" The guard nodded slowly. "Sleep came once, but I made a promise to these walls. As long as they stand, I shall not fall. I shall not sleep." The words drifted into the night like the last breath of a prayer. Arif felt tears sting his eyes. He wasn't looking at history anymore. He was looking at devotion made eternal. The clouds moved away, and the moonlight gently unveiled the guard's face. Tired, calm, and strangely peaceful, Arif whispered, "I want to hear your story." The guard's voice was soft, yet deep enough to shake the air. "You wish to listen?" Then be prepared to stay awake. For this story does not sleep until it is told. Soft music swells, a low hum of wind and time blending together. And just like that, between the ancient walls and the endless night, two souls stood awake, one bound by duty, the other by curiosity, and together they awakened a story that had been waiting for centuries to be heard. Morning came quietly over Raghavgarh. The mist lingered like a dream that refused to end. Sunlight struggled to touch the old stones, as if even light hesitated to wake what slept beneath. Arif sat outside his tent, sipping lukewarm tea from a tin cup, watching the fort walls glow faintly in the morning haze. He hadn't slept at all, not because he couldn't, but because something within those walls felt alive, something that pulled him into its silence. He opened his notebook. Last night's words stared back at him. He said he was never allowed to sleep. Arif ran his fingers over the line. The ink had smudged slightly, proof that his hands had trembled when he wrote it. Was it a dream? A hallucination? Or had he really spoken to the guard of legend? The one the villagers still whispered about, even now? Later that day, Arif walked down the hill to the nearest village, a quiet cluster of homes with thatched roofs and tired eyes. As he entered, conversation stopped. People looked at him, their faces uncertain, their eyes cautious. An old woman sitting by the well spoke first. "You went up there, didn't you?" Arif nodded. "Yes, I spent the night at the fort." Her hands froze on the rope. The bucket hung in midair. "Then you've heard him." Arif hesitated. "You mean the guard?" The woman's lips trembled as she spoke. "He's been there for hundreds of years, watching, walking, never resting. They say he walks the ramparts every full moon. If he stops, the fort will fall to dust." Another villager, a man with lines deep on his face, came closer. "It's not a story, Sahib. My grandfather saw him, a tall shadow in the mist, carrying a spear that glowed faintly. They say he guards something sacred, or cursed." Arif's pen scratched the page. He was writing every word, every tremor in their voices. The man continued. The guard's name was Veer Abaram, a soldier of King Devraj. When the kingdom was attacked, the king and queen died inside that fort. But the guard, he survived, and he swore an oath upon their ashes that he would never close his eyes until the fort was safe again. The woman beside the well looked toward the distant hills. "He kept that promise, Sahib, long after everyone else turned to dust." Arif's breath caught. But how can anyone stay awake forever? The old woman smiled faintly. Because the gods heard him. And sometimes when a vow is too strong, it becomes a curse. The villagers refused to talk after that. They turned away, returning to their chores, their silence, their ordinary fears. Arif closed his notebook. He could feel the story deepening. Not just a tale, but a heartbeat echoing through time. That night, he returned to the fort. The moon had risen, casting long, pale shadows across the courtyard. Arif stood where he had seen the guard before and whispered into the night, "Abaram, are you there?" For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, from a far wall, a soft sound echoed. The slow rhythm of footsteps on stone. A figure emerged from the shadows. The same tall presence, the same silent power. The guard stopped before him. The moonlight fell across his armor, cracked, rusted, but still gleaming faintly, as though memory itself refused to fade. "You came back," the guard said, his voice like distant thunder, low and calm. Arif nodded. "I want to know more. Who are you really? Why are you still awake?" The guard turned his gaze toward the horizon. "I was once like you, flesh and blood, fear and hope. A soldier sworn to protect my king and queen. When the kingdom burned, I stayed. I told them I would never rest until Raghavgarh stood again." His eyes darkened with memory. But time forgot the king. The queen's name faded from stone. Only my promise remained. And promises are heavier than swords. Arif whispered, "You've been guarding ruins for centuries." The guard looked down at his hands. Calloused, cracked, almost transparent now. A vow doesn't die with the body. It becomes your breath. And I kept breathing long after I was supposed to stop. Arif's heart ached. The air felt colder, thicker, as though the fort itself was listening. "Did you ever try to rest?" he asked softly. Abaram smiled faintly. "Once, I closed my eyes. The walls began to crumble. The air screamed. So I opened them again. Silence spread between them. Not empty, but filled with centuries of longing. Arif sat down on the stone steps. He could feel the guard's presence beside him, like the echo of heat after a fire long gone out. "You're not just guarding the fort," Arif said. "You're guarding a memory." Abaram's voice grew distant. There was someone here, someone worth guarding. The queen. She trusted me with something more precious than her life. And until it's safe, I cannot sleep. Arif turned toward him. "What did she give you?" The guard didn't answer. He looked up at the moon. "When you're ready, you'll find it yourself." A soft wind moved through the corridor, carrying the scent of jasmine. Faint, almost forgotten, Arif felt something stir inside him, something both ancient and personal. "Abaram," he whispered, "what happens when I find it?" The guard's eyes glowed faintly. "Then, maybe both of us can rest." That night, as Arif lay under the open sky, he couldn't sleep, not because he was afraid, but because the story itself was awake inside him. He could still hear the guard's footsteps, slow and steady, echoing across the ramparts above. And somewhere in the dark, the whispering walls seemed to hum softly. "Stay awake, traveler. The story is only beginning." Before the silence, there was sound. Before the ruins, there was a kingdom, bright, alive, filled with the scent of rain and sandalwood. The kingdom of Raghavgarh stood proud on the hill, its towers rising like prayer hands toward the morning sky. The walls were red sandstone, and the banners fluttered with the golden emblem of a rising sun, the mark of King Devraj's reign. And among his many warriors, there was one who never raised his voice, never boasted of victory. It was known by every soldier in the realm. Veer Abhiram. Abaram was not born noble. He was a farmer's son from the edge of the kingdom, quiet, steady, with eyes that saw more than they spoke. When he joined the royal guard at 16, the commander said, "You have the look of someone who listens to the wind. But the wind carries too many lies, boy. Learn to stand firm." And so he did. Through years of battle and service, he became the shadow at the king's side, always there, always watching. They called him the Eyes of Raghavgarh, but those eyes held something deeper, a promise even he didn't yet understand. It was a monsoon evening when he first saw Queen Haayy. The sky had turned the color of bruised violet, and the courtyard smelled of rain and wet earth. She stood by the temple steps, offering water to the sacred flame, her silken veil soaked and clinging to her hands. Abaram had only come to deliver a message from the king, but when she turned and their eyes met, something inside him stilled, as if time itself had paused to breathe. She smiled, not with pride, not with distance, but with the warmth of someone who recognized an old soul in another. "You are the guard from the North Tower, aren't you?" Abaram bowed deeply. "Yes, my queen. You keep watch even when it rains?" "The rain doesn't see the enemy, your majesty. So neither do I." She laughed softly, a sound like silver against water. "A man who never rests, that sounds lonely." "Duty is not loneliness, my queen," he said. "It is faith given shape." And that night, as thunder rolled across the sky, the queen remembered his words, though she didn't yet know why. Months passed. The world outside Raghavgarh grew restless. Whispers of invasion drifted across the border. King Devraj rode out often, leaving the queen behind with her household and a handful of trusted guards, Abaram among them. One night, the queen's messenger came running to the barracks. "The queen has summoned you." Alone, Abaram followed him through the dark corridors to the royal chambers. Inside, the air was heavy with incense and worry. Queen Haayy stood by the window, her veil lifted by the night wind. Below, the torches of the fort flickered like fireflies. "Abaram," she said quietly, "how long have you been serving the crown?" 14 years, my queen. "And in all those years, have you ever broken a promise?" "Never." She turned to him, eyes steady but heavy with something unspoken. "Then promise me one more thing. No matter what happens to me or to this fort, you will guard it. Guard it until the world forgets its name." Abaram bowed. "I will, my queen." She placed a small bronze talisman in his hand, a sun carved within a circle, the royal crest. "This was the king's first gift to me," she whispered. "Now it is yours." It will remind you that even in darkness, there is light to protect. Her fingers brushed his a fleeting touch, but it burned into his soul like fire under skin. That night, as thunder cracked above the hills, Abiram made his vow beneath the ancient banyan near the fort gates. By the blood I have shed, by the stone beneath my feet, I will keep my eyes open until this kingdom sleeps in peace again. Days later, the war reached Raghavgarh. The enemy banners darkened the horizon. Hundreds of them, a tide of metal and fury. The fort shook under the roar of siege engines. Fire turned night into chaos. The king fell on the third day. The queen refused to flee. She stood in the temple courtyard, her armor glinting beneath the flames, and said, "If Raghavgarh burns, it will burn with its heart intact." Abiram fought beside her until dawn. When the final gate fell, he was the last man standing between the enemy and the queen. His sword was chipped, his body broken, but his vow remained untouched. "Go," she told him. "Your place is not beside me anymore. It's with the fort." He knelt before her. "Then let me keep my promise, my queen. I will stay. I will watch." And when the flames reached the temple, the queen cast one last look toward the north tower, where Abiram stood like a statue carved of stone and sorrow. She whispered something, words lost to fire, but perhaps carried by the wind that night. And when the sun rose again, Raghavgarh was silent. The war was over. The kingdom was gone. But somewhere among the ashes, a heartbeat continued, steady, waiting, awake. Years blurred into centuries. Rain washed over the stones. Grass grew where soldiers had fallen. But on nights when the moon was full, villagers said they saw a lone figure walking the ramparts. Armor rusted, eyes unblinking, carrying a spear that shimmered faintly in the dark. They called him the Sleepless Guard, and though his name was lost to history, his vow whispered through the wind. A prayer, a curse, a promise without end. "As long as these walls stand, I shall not sleep." Soft pause. Wind fades. Music grows tender and quiet. And in the present, Ariv sat listening in silence. The guard had fallen quiet now, his voice fading like smoke in moonlight. Ariv finally whispered, "You made a promise out of love." Abiram's faint smile appeared in the shadows. "Yes, and love, my friend, is the only thing stronger than sleep." The ruins of Raghavgarh still breathed. Even after centuries, the stones seemed to carry whispers, soft, lingering sighs of what once was. In the stillness of the night, Ariv, the modern wanderer, stood inside the queen's old chamber. The moonlight spilled through the broken lattice, painting silver patterns on the cracked marble floor. And in that fragile light, he found it, a small bronze talisman, half buried in dust, a sun carved within a circle, the same symbol that had glowed in Abiram's memory. He picked it up gently, his heart thudding with the strange certainty that he was touching the past. As his fingers brushed against the metal, the air thickened. The smell of sandalwood and smoke filled the chamber. And somewhere, faintly, a woman's voice began to hum. Soft, mournful, like a lullaby meant for someone who could never sleep. Flashback, centuries earlier, Queen Haayy sat by the open balcony of her private quarters. The rain had ended, leaving the air heavy with petrichor. Her maidens had retired for the night. Only the distant echo of the night patrol could be heard. Abiram's measured steps upon the ramparts. She looked down at the fort's courtyard, where the torches burned low, and whispered to herself, "He will not rest until I tell him to." Her heart ached with a weight she could no longer carry. Haayy had been a queen for 12 years, a wife for 15, and yet she had never been allowed to be a woman. Her husband, King Devraj, was a good ruler, brave, just but distant. His heart belonged to the throne. His love was a duty, not a warmth. And so Haayy learned silence. She learned to smile without feeling it, to speak in words that hid her truth. Until the day she met the guard from the North Tower. At first, she only noticed his discipline, how he stood motionless through the storm, how he refused to abandon his post, even when lightning split the sky. But over time, she began to see more. She saw the quiet kindness in his eyes when he helped a stable boy pick up fallen tools. She saw how he bowed to the temple flame every dawn and whispered something she couldn't hear. And one evening, when she passed by the north wall after dusk, she saw him kneeling beside a dying soldier. Not a nobleman, not a commander, just a boy from the outer village. Abaram pressed water to the boy's lips and whispered, "No guard sleeps until every child of this kingdom rests in peace." Those words struck her deeper than any poem could. She knew then that this man's loyalty wasn't to the crown alone. It was to the soul of the land itself, to its people, to her. Days turned into weeks, and their paths began to cross more often, sometimes by chance, sometimes not. Haayy would bring food to the temple at twilight, and always, somehow, Abaram would be near, either helping a priest lift offerings or guarding the entrance in quiet reverence. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, she found him repairing the broken gate of the courtyard. He bowed as she approached, but she stopped him gently. "You don't always have to bow, Abaram," she said. "Forgive me, my queen. It is the only way I know to show respect. Then show respect to yourself, too. You've given this fort your youth." He smiled faintly. "It has given me purpose." "And have you ever desired more than purpose?" she asked softly. Abaram looked up, surprised, cautious. "Desire is a dangerous path for those sworn to serve." "Perhaps," she whispered, "but sometimes desire is the only path that keeps us alive." Their eyes met then, not as queen and guard, but as two lonely souls bound by the same silence. The air between them trembled, with the weight of a truth they could never speak. That night, Haayy could not sleep. The rain began again, and every drop against the stone sounded like a heartbeat. She rose from her bed and walked barefoot to the balcony. Below, she could see the faint glow of a torch. Abaram was still awake, always awake. She watched him from above, a figure carved of patience and duty. And something within her broke, not with sorrow, but with tenderness. "You will destroy yourself," she whispered. "You'll give everything to protect this place, and no one will ever remember your name." A tear slipped down her cheek, and before it touched the ground, she made a choice that would change both their fates. The next morning, she summoned him to the royal temple. Alone, the sacred flame burned low. The sound of chanting echoed faintly beyond the walls. When Abaram entered, she turned to face him. "The king rides to war tomorrow," she said. "The fort will be yours to guard. As always, my queen." "No," she said firmly. "This time, you'll not guard just the walls. You will guard the heart." He frowned slightly. "I do not understand." She stepped closer. The distance between them felt like the edge of a blade. Thin, sharp, dangerous. "If I fall, Abaram, if this kingdom burns, I want you to protect its spirit. Promise me you will never rest until Raghavgarh is at peace again." His voice wavered. "You asked me to give up my rest for eternity." "Yes," she said, her voice trembling, "because you're the only one I trust to keep that promise." He knelt, not as a soldier, but as a man surrendering his soul. "Then I vow," he whispered, "that even when the last torch fades, I will still watch." Haayy closed her eyes. Her heart ached with love and fear. She reached for the small bronze talisman, the king's gift, and placed it in his palm. "This will guide you back to the light when the world forgets you." Their hands lingered, trembling. No words could fill the silence that followed, a silence so deep it felt sacred. And then, before she turned away, she spoke one last time, her voice barely a breath. "Abaram, if the gods ever forgive me, may we meet again, not as queen and guard, but as two souls free to rest." The sound of rain fades. The present returns. Ariv stood frozen in the chamber, still holding the same talisman. His pulse echoed in his ears like a heartbeat from another life. Somewhere deep inside him, a memory stirred, like an ember waking after a long, dark sleep. He whispered into the silence, "Queen Haayy, you loved him." The air grew warm. The faint scent of jasmine filled the room, and in the shimmer of moonlight, for just an instant, he saw her, a woman of grace and sorrow, standing at the balcony, looking out toward the North Tower. Her eyes filled with the kind of love that survives centuries, and then like a sigh, she faded. Soft music begins, a mix of flute and wind. Outside, The fort seemed to breathe again. The walls hummed with the weight of old vows, old love, and the soft rustle of forgiveness. Arav closed his eyes. For the first time, he didn't feel afraid of the whispers, because now he knew the truth. The sleepless guard didn't stay awake because of a curse. He stayed awake because of love, a promise made beneath rain and moonlight. Before dawn, Raghavgarh held its breath. The hills around the fort were dark shapes against a restless sky. Lightning flashed across the valley, and for a heartbeat the banners of the approaching army shone silver and black. Inside the fort, torches hissed in the rain. Men whispered prayers. Horses stamped their hooves in fear. And through it all, one figure moved like quiet fire. Abaram, the guard who had vowed never to rest. He walked the ramparts with steady steps, checking every bowstring, every lock on the gate. His armor was scratched, his eyes sleepless, but his mind was clear as the blade at his side. The queen had not slept either. From her balcony, she watched him move through the storm. The wind caught her veil, and she whispered into the rain, "May the gods keep you safe, my sleepless one." The enemy arrives. When the first horn sounded, it was not from within the fort. It came from the hills. The enemy had arrived. Thousands of torches shimmered like a serpent of fire winding up the valley road. Arrows began to fall, whistling through the rain. The stones of Raghavgarh shuddered. Abaram raised his hand, and the archers on the wall loosed their arrows in reply. For hours the storm and the battle were one. Thunder and steel, rain and blood. He moved among the soldiers, calm and wordless, a presence that steadied trembling hearts. Whenever a man faltered, Abaram's voice was there. "Hold the line. The walls breathe with you." He fought like a part of the fortress itself, silent, immovable. But by dusk, the outer gate cracked. Flames crawled up the wooden beams. The air filled with smoke. A messenger stumbled to him, crying, "The king is down. The eastern flank is broken." Abaram's heart turned to stone. He had known it would come to this. He gave the order, "Seal the inner gates. Move the queen to the temple." The queen's stand. Queen Haayy refused to flee. When her attendants begged her to escape through the hidden passage, she shook her head. "A queen's place is where her people fall. If this is our end, it will be met in the open beneath the gods' eyes." She donned light armor, silver inlaid with turquoise, and bound her hair with a golden pin shaped like the rising sun. In her hand, she held not a weapon, but the royal banner of Raghavgarh. When Abaram entered, smoke curling behind him, he knelt instantly. "My queen, the walls will not hold till morning. Then we will hold them ourselves," she said. "Stand beside me, Abaram. Tonight, you're not my guard. You are my equal." For the first time, he allowed himself to look at her without the veil of duty. And in that moment, amidst the chaos, there was peace. Two souls, bound by a promise older than the war. The night of fire, the battle that followed, was the last breath of Raghavgarh. Arrows rained like burning stars. Flames crawled across the battlements. Screams and thunder blended into one endless roar. Abaram fought until his sword broke, then took up a fallen spear. Every wound felt distant, as if his body no longer belonged to him. Near midnight, the enemy breached the temple gates. Haayy stood upon the steps, the banner held high even as arrows tore through the silk. "As long as this flame burns," she shouted, "Raghavgarh lives." An arrow struck her shoulder. Another grazed her cheek, but she did not fall. Abaram reached her just as the third arrow came, and stepped before it. The shaft buried itself in his chest. He staggered, the world narrowing to the sound of her voice. "Abaram." He turned, blood warm beneath the rain, and whispered, "I promised to guard the heart of this fort. Now I've kept that promise." He fell to his knees. She caught him, cradling his head against her lap, as the temple burned around them. "You cannot leave me," she whispered. "Not yet." "My queen," he breathed. "Let the fort sleep. Let me stay awake for both of us." And with his last breath, he pressed the bronze talisman into her hand. Then he was still. The queen's final act. Outside, the enemy roared. The temple roof groaned beneath the heat. Haayy rose, blood running down her arm, and looked toward the north tower, his post, his vow, his soul. "You will not watch alone," she said. She turned toward the sacred flame, the symbol of the kingdom's spirit. With trembling hands, she lifted the talisman to the fire. "By this light," she prayed, "let his soul be bound to the fort, not in pain, but in guardianship. Let his wakefulness protect what we loved." The fire flared, a white brilliance that swallowed her form. When the soldiers broke through the doors moments later, they found only ashes, and beside them, a guard spear standing upright in the stone floor, unmoved by the wind. The dawn after, when morning came, the invaders found no living soul inside the fort. They called it cursed and fled. And for centuries, no one lived there again. But travelers who passed through the valley spoke of strange things. A flicker of light on the north tower, footsteps echoing on empty walls, a voice murmuring through the rain. "Rest easy, I'm still awake." Soft wind returns. The drums fade. The narration slows. In the present, Ariv listened to the end of that memory. Tears traced his cheeks. The fort around him seemed alive again, not haunted but held in love. He looked toward the north tower, where the moon touched the stones like silver fire. Somewhere up there, a shadow moved, steady, patient, eternal. "You kept your promise, Abaram," he whispered. "But maybe it's time to rest." The wind answered softly, almost like a sigh, when the fires of Raghavgarh faded, and the sun rose weakly through the smoke. The fort stood alone. Ashes covered the courtyard. The temple was a ruin of stone and shadow. But in the heart of the destruction, beneath the cracked dome of the shrine, a single spear still stood upright, its point buried deep in the earth. And beside it, a body lay still. Abaram, the guard who had never slept. His armor was blackened by flame. His eyes were closed, as if resting at last. But the air around him was strange, too still, too alive. The wind seemed to circle his form, whispering like 100 unseen voices. The bronze talisman the queen had once given him glowed faintly in the ashes beside him. And then, slowly, his fingers moved. The awakening. Abaram opened his eyes. The world around him was silent. The fire had burned out, the sky gray with dawn. He tried to stand, but his legs felt weightless, his body no longer bound by flesh or pain. He looked down and saw himself lying there, motionless. A breath escaped him that wasn't a breath at all. He reached out, but his hand passed through his own armor like mist. What is this?" he whispered. A sound answered him, not thunder, not wind, but the echo of a woman's voice. Soft, clear, eternal. "You made a promise, my guardian." He turned toward the temple's flame, or what was left of it. It flickered once more, as if fueled by something unseen. And within it, for the briefest instant, he saw her, Queen Haayy. Her form was made of light and ash. Her face calm, her eyes filled with both love and sorrow. "You wish to protect what we loved," she said. "And now, the gods have heard you." "My queen," his voice trembled. "I failed. The fort has fallen." "No," she whispered. "As long as you remain, Raghavgarh still breathes." He reached for her, but his hand touched only air. "How long?" he asked quietly. "How long must I stay?" Her answer came like the wind through dry leaves. "Until peace finds its place, or the world forgets it." Then she was gone. The flame died, and silence claimed the fort once more. The first night, when darkness returned, so did Abaram's purpose. He rose from the temple steps, his spirit still clad in the armor he once wore. The wounds upon his chest no longer bled. He felt neither hunger nor pain, but his heart still beat, slow and steady, as if reminding him he was not entirely gone. He climbed the north tower, his tower, and looked out over the valley. The fires in the distance had faded. The enemy had left. All was still. Only the wind remained, carrying faint echoes of the lives that once filled the fort. Children laughing, soldiers training, the queen's voice calling to the birds in the garden. He stood there until dawn, and when the first light touched the stones, he whispered to the empty horizon, "The watch continues." Centuries of silence. Time began to lose meaning. Days melted into years, years into centuries. The fort crumbled. The banners rotted into dust. Trees grew where soldiers had once walked, and still Abaram watched. Sometimes travelers passed through the valley. Sometimes wild animals nested in the halls. He would see them all, but none could see him. He became the echo that lived between heartbeats, the glimmer that flickered at the edge of vision. When storms came, he would stand in the rain and remember the queen's laughter. When moonlight fell across the ramparts, he would whisper her name, not to call her back, but to keep her from being forgotten. "Ah," he murmured, "you are my sleep, my dawn, my silence." The curse takes shape. Over time, his watch became heavier. The longer he stayed awake, the less he felt human. His memories began to fade. Not completely, but like old ink on parchment. He could no longer recall the sound of his own voice, or the warmth of sunlight on his skin. Sometimes, he tried to rest. He would sit by the temple steps, close his eyes, and imagine sleep. But each time he did, the fort would cry out, a sudden groan in the stones, a shiver through the walls, as if it feared to be left alone. And so he would rise again, and again, and again. "I will not sleep," he told the fort. "You are not ready to dream." The visitors. As centuries passed, the world outside changed. Empires rose and fell. The valley became wild, then forgotten. But stories survived. Villagers told tales of a sleepless spirit who guarded the old ruins. Some called him a ghost, others an angel of the past. They said that on nights of thunder, you could see him walking the walls, his eyes glowing like fireflies, his armor shining in flashes of lightning. Children left offerings of flowers and oil lamps at the fort gates, believing that the spirit would bless those who respected the old stones. Abaram watched them with quiet gratitude. He could no longer speak, but he could listen. And when the children whispered prayers to the wind, he would stir the air gently. A soft breeze, a sign that he had heard. The weight of forever. But eternity, even when filled with purpose, is a heavy thing. Abaram began to feel the cracks within his vow. Each century stretched longer than the one before. The silence grew deeper, the world colder. Sometimes, he would look toward the mountains and imagine walking away, just stepping beyond the fort walls and never returning. But the moment he took a single step beyond the gates, he felt a pull, like chains of light around his chest. The queen's vow held him, not in cruelty, but in love. "As long as you remain, Raghavgarh still breathes." Her voice echoed softly through time. He could not abandon her, so he returned to the walls and resumed his watch, the dream that wasn't. One night, many centuries later, he felt something different. The wind had changed. It carried the scent of wet soil and distant human voices. Not echoes, but real. He walked to the highest tower, and there, for the first time in ages, he saw light approaching the valley. Lanterns. People. They were coming toward the fort, not to plunder, but to remember. He felt the air tremble with new life. And deep inside him, something stirred, a warmth he hadn't felt since the queen's touch. "Perhaps," he whispered, "the world hasn't forgotten after all." He didn't know yet that one of those travelers was a man named Arif, a historian whose dreams would awaken the old guard's heart. But that was a story for another night. Soft flute music. The wind fades. The voice slows to a whisper. So the guard remained, awake beneath the stars, his soul bound to stone and silence, neither cursed nor blessed, simply faithful. And when the moonlight touched his face, one could almost see him smile, as if still listening to the echo of a queen's last prayer. "Sleep well, my king. I will stay awake for you." He had read the tales, whispers of a guard who never slept, shadows that moved without bodies, and a queen whose prayers lingered longer than her life. But he was a historian, a man of reason, and yet, as the valley stretched beneath the twilight, even he felt a tremor of unease. The fort rose ahead like a jagged crown on a hill, its walls blackened by centuries, its towers leaning as if peering into the past. He parked at the base, taking out his notebook and camera. The air smelled of earth and old stone, a smell that seemed to seep into memory itself. "Here begins the story," he whispered, and stepped forward. The first encounter. The main gate was half collapsed, vines crawling over broken iron. As Ariv passed beneath its arch, he felt a presence. Not cold, not hostile, but ancient. The wind shifted, brushing against his cheek. It felt like a hand, warm, deliberate, guiding. "Someone's watching," he muttered, but there was no one. The inner courtyard stretched wide, dotted with fallen pillars and shattered statues. A faint glow lingered along the north tower. He climbed the steps slowly, noticing marks on the stone, tiny scratches that formed patterns, as if someone had walked the path 1,000 times before him. A whisper rose through the air, almost imperceptible. "Welcome, historian." Ariv froze. He told himself it was the wind. Yet the words lingered, curling around his mind like smoke. Dreams begin. That night, he camped inside a small, roofless hall. By the pale moonlight, he began sketching the fort's layout, tracing the cracks and inscriptions he found along the walls. Then came the dreams. In the first, he walked corridors lined with torches. Figures in black armor passed silently, their eyes hidden behind helm visors. At the center of the courtyard, a lone figure stood, tall, statuesque, and impossibly still. Ariv approached, and the figure's eyes opened. Pale, gold-rimmed, filled with endless centuries. "You see me," the figure said without moving lips. "And yet, do you understand?" Ariv tried to speak, but his voice failed. The guard extended a hand, pointing toward a staircase descending into darkness. A cold wind whispered, "Follow, or forget." He woke with a start, heart hammering. Outside, the fort was silent, but he could feel the weight of unseen eyes. The Library of Shadows. The next morning, Ariv explored deeper, finding a room partially buried under debris. Inside were shelves of scrolls blackened by time. He brushed away the dust and opened one. The script was unfamiliar, curved lines spiraling inward, like thoughts turned on themselves. As he traced a symbol with his finger, he felt it vibrate, softly, faintly, like a heartbeat. And then the air changed. A gentle warmth, a presence beside him. Though no one stood there. A whisper. They waited. We waited. Now you listen. Ariv shivered. He was no longer merely a visitor. He had become part of the fort's long memory. The Sleepless guard revealed. By nightfall, Ariv found the North Tower, the place villagers feared most. He climbed to the top, torch in hand. The moonlight fell across the ruined parapets, illuminating a figure standing perfectly still. The armor glimmered faintly. The figure turned its head, eyes locking on Ariv's. It was Abaram, the Sleepless guard. Not a spirit, not a ghost, but something in between, a sentinel bound to the fort, yet aware of the living. "Why are you here?" Ariv asked, voice trembling. The guard tilted his head. The wind carried the answer. "To remember, to bear witness." "You must too," Ariv realized then.